So anyway, so I'm going to use the example behind, or my window behind me as an example to kind of show you how to go about making curtains. I'm going to talk about a couple different variations that you can do to a basic curtain, but honestly, anybody could do this. It's really not that hard. It's as easy as sewing a pillow, maybe even easier because you don't have to hand sew anything. But you do want to make sure you do it in the correct order of steps, otherwise your rod, whatever you want to hang the curtains with, isn't going to go through it. So before we do that, I do want to talk real quick about the types of fabric that you want to use. You absolutely, positively, 100% do not want to use stretchy fabric on curtains. The reason why is when they're hanging there and gravity's pulling down on them, stretchy fabric will end up just stretching and sagging. It's really not going to stand up to it. Whenever you are doing a woven fabric, you do need to make sure that the length of the curtains is going on the lengthwise grain of the fabric. So for an example, if I have this piece of fabric here, you have to find the salvage end. If you're unsure if you bought a yard of fabric, the salvage end would be the end that's 36 inches. Okay, sometimes the salvage end looks white, so let me pull another example over so you can see. Beverly, I'm not sure if you're watching, but you sent me these this fabric a really long time ago with some strips, so they'll come in handy when I continue making some masks. So this is what the salvage edge on some fabrics look like. This is the salvage end on other fabrics. Again, if you're not sure, a couple ways you can tell. When you've washed fabric on on a woven fabric, you'll see threads coming off the edge. That's called the raw edge. The salvage edge, you notice, does not have them. Now, even though this looks similar to the rest of the fabric, about a ½ inch of this is even more tightly woven than the rest of them, so you actually don't want to sew on that at all. So if you are going to include it, you'd need to make sure you fold it twice, enough to go in from that so you're not actually sewing on it. And like I said, if you buy a yard of fabric, the lengthwise edge, or the salvage edge, is going to be the same length that you bought it. So if you bought 1 yard, it would be 36, 2 yards 72, and so on. The crosswise grain goes in this direction. Now the reason why I mention this is because even in a fabric that isn't stretchy, there is some stretch in some directions. So if I move those examples out of the way. So I have a piece of fabric here just to show you. So right now I have no idea which way is the salvage edge and which way is the raw edge because I cut this out. But an easy way to find out if you've already cut it is to pull it. If it pulls and nothing happens, that's definitely the lengthwise edge. So if I was making curtains, I'd want it to go this way. If I turn on the other side, you'll see even though it's not really stretchy, it is pulling a little bit. That's the crosswise grain. When you make clothing, this is what goes around your body. Again, because gravity can pull down. And then the crazy thing is if you actually do it on a 45-degree angle and pull on the corners, you'll see how much more it stretches, even though this isn't a stretchy fabric whatsoever. So that is the bias direction in the fabric. So bottom line is you do want to make sure that the least stretchy side, which in this case is my short side, would be going up and down on the curtains. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to measure. And obviously a tape measure would be better. Please don't mind my pile of fabric. This is my pile for when I make some mask again. So what you want to do is measure your window from frame to frame. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So in this case, it's almost about 40 inches. Now, a lot of people like curtains that are open in the center, so you can open it up or tie it back, things like that. So in that case, I would just divide that number by 2, which would be 20, and then go from there, and then just do 2 panels. The more panels you do, the more sewing you obviously have to do. The other thing you want to think about is how scrunched up do you want your curtains to be? Do you want them to just have a little bit of scrunching? Then I would do 1.5 times the width of the window. If you like them super scrunched, I would do 2 times the width of the window. So I'm just going to, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to say I want them somewhat scrunched. So if I was doing 1 panel of 40, I would actually do it 60 inches wide, because 40 times 1.5 is 60. If I'm doing 2 panels of 20, then I would do each of those panels by 30 inches, because again, 20 times 1.5 is 30. The other thing you want to keep in mind is how long do you want the length of them. So if I was going to have my rod hang here, right where this is, then I would just make it easy and measure from the rod to how far down that you want them. So most standard curtains, I believe, come in like 60, 84, things like that. So you will need a piece of paper because this will help you make sure that you don't make any mistakes. So I'm just going to draw as if I was doing this window. I'm just going to draw 2 rectangles to represent my 2 panels for my window. So I know that it was 20 across, so I'm going to write that that side's going to be 30 inches. Okay, and then I'm just going to make up a number, and let's say my length I want it to be is 60 inches long. Now, that's fine, but you have to include seam allowances and hems and things like that. So on each of the long sides, the length of the window, you are going to have to fold the fabric under twice. So you are going to lose an inch, roughly, on each side. So am I okay with it being 28 inches? Probably. If you aren't okay with that width being lost, then add 2 inches to it. So I could make this 32 inches instead of 30. Okay. Now the other thing is you have to think about what you want your curtain to look like. So a couple options could be you have a little ruffle at the top, then you have your rod, then you have the main part of the curtain. So I can explain how to do that. A second option would be that the rod's at the top and then the curtain hangs. And then the last option would be that you have tabs at the top. So those would be just rectangular pieces that go around the rod. So before you make curtains, you definitely need to make sure you know the size of the rod that you need. So if you're not sure how big you need to make the opening, this is what I would suggest doing. If this is my rod that the curtain's going to go around, take your measuring tape and go around it and make sure that the rod is going to be able to slide through. So if I was doing it for the Sharpie, my pocket would need to be at least 2 3/4 inches. It could be 2.5, but that's going to be kind of tight. So 2 3/4 would definitely give us enough room for the rod to slide through it. So I'll show you first the one if you want a ruffle at the top and then your rod. So if I want a ruffle at the top, so it'll be ruffled up here. So if I want that, the ruffle can be 1 inches, 2 inches. When I made them before, most of the time I make that ruffle about 1.5 inches. If I was using the rod size that I just showed you, I would draw a second line. This is where the rod is going to go through the curtain. That needs to be 2 3/4 inches. Okay. Then I'm going to have my curtain, which I just made up a number, and that needs to be 60 inches because I'm measuring from the bottom of the rod to the bottom of the curtain. And then the last thing is you do need to consider how big you want the hem. Most standard curtains have about a 3-inch hem, so if you want it to look like you bought it, you need an extra 3 inches down here at the bottom for the hem. Now if you're kind of short on fabric or want to conserve, you can make that a regular hem as well. Now everywhere the fabric is going to be folded under, which is at the hem, where the rod's going in, and the ruffle at the top, you have to double each of those numbers. So that's the fabric that's going to be on the back. So we now need an extra 3 inches on the back, plus you need about a 1/2 inch to fold that back piece under. Up here, I need an extra 1/2 inch to fold the fabric under, plus I need another 2 3/4 inches, plus I need another 1.5 inches. So when we add this together, we have a 60-inch curtain, plus we have 1.5 inches plus 1.5 inches, so that doubles the top. Then I need 2 3/4 doubled. Then I need an extra 1/2 inch on the bottom. That's what it's going to be folded under, so there's no raw edges showing. Then down at the bottom, I need 3 inches for the front of my hem, 3 inches for the back of my hem, and an extra 1/2 inch for that. So if we add that all together, that's 63, 68, 68 and a half, 70, or 69, 75. So we need 75.5 inches. So again, if you want to conserve on your fabric, and let's say you wanted to do a panel and you just wanted to use 2 yards of fabric, you can make some of these. 2 yards is about 72 inches if it doesn't shrink. And I would definitely wash your curtains first. Wash the fabric first. You could definitely take these 3s and make them lesser to give you closer to 72, and then you'll be conserving fabric. Okay, so when I cut out my fabric, now I need 2 pieces that are 75.5 by 32 inches. If you're really not sure after watching this, I can do the math for you. So if you just tell me what the size of your window is and what kind of pattern you want to do, that's fine. If I was doing this and I didn't want the extra ruffle at the top, I could just take off these 3 inches also. Okay, and if I wanted tabs at the top, basically you remove pretty much this whole top section you don't need, so you would just have an inch at the top. So again, I can help you with that. Okay, so you cut out your fabric, so we're going to pretend this is the size of the piece that I did. So when you're making curtains, you definitely need to make sure that you hem the long edges of the curtain first. Girls, I'm live on a video, honey. Ella, you're yelling. Okay, so you definitely have to hem the 2 sides first. If you have a serger and you don't mind the serging stitches being shown on the, like if someone looked in the window or something, you could by all means just serge it and then do it. I'm going to do it as if people don't have a serger. Okay, so what I would recommend doing on each side is measure a 1/2 inch and 1 inch. And you move down the fabric and you mark these. If you really don't have any fabric marking tools to use, you can actually use regular chalkboard chalk, and you could probably get away with using just a basic washable Crayola marker, something that shows up on your fabric. The washable kind should come out, but I've never actually tried it, but I know people do that. So there's my one long end. So now I'm going to go to the other long end and do the same thing. 1/2 inch and 1 inch. Move it up. 1/2 inch, 1 inch. And obviously the longer the panel is, the longer this part's going to take you. And depending on how exact and precise you want to be, I would definitely, you know, measure more. So what my piece looks like this right now. So I'm actually going to go and iron this. Just so that you can see all steps in the process. So if you were watching my demo the other day, I talked about finger pressing. So I would do the same in this. So what you want to do is your right side of your fabric is face down, and then I'm going to fold up so that my marks that I made are right on the edge. And I'm just going to take my fingers and I'm going to press the fabric with my fingers. This is a quilting cotton, so this is very easy to do on this. And then you're going to take your iron and you're going to press that side in. Now the one thing that you want to keep in mind when you're pressing is there is a difference between ironing and pressing. Ironing is what you do to get wrinkles out of something. So it's sort of like ice skating or roller skating. When you're ironing, you're kind of moving it around. When you're pressing, you're trying to put the fabric in a position it's never been in before. So it's important when you do this to basically push down, lift up. Okay, you can slide it a little bit, but what we're trying to do is get that to stay. Now I can go ahead and fold it my second time, and if I did it correctly, now my second marks that I made would be showing. Now, if you want to save yourself some time, you could actually just mark the 1/2 inch, and then when you fold it the second time, you just fold it so that original raw edge is touching this part of the fold. Okay, so I got that pressed. So now I'm going to do my other long side. Same thing, it works better if you finger press it first. And this is going to be important too, that you make sure that you don't move the fabric to the left. When you are folding it, you do want to make sure that you fold it directly straight. Steam in your iron helps. Mine's out of water right this second, but it's still holding enough. And so now I would fold the second part over as well and iron that. So now I'm going to go ahead and just sew these 2 strips real quick. I have white thread, or like a really light purple thread in my machine, So I'm just going to go ahead and do that because then it'll be easier to see. So when you put this in the machine, you definitely want your stitches close to this inside edge. Now there is a whole 1/2 inch of fabric underneath here, and that's a good window to have, or a good amount to have there, because if you don't sew straight, it's not going to come undone because you have a whole 1/2 inch of fabric there. So you want to make sure that you back stitch at the beginning, and just a regular 2.5 stitch length is fine. And I'm just going to use the edge of the presser foot as my guide. So when my needle's in the left position, the edge of the presser foot is 4/8. So my fold was actually a tiny bit bigger than 4/8. Back stitch to the end, cut your threads. Now you're going to do the same thing on this other side. Oops. Would help if my thread is still in my needle. Up, and my thread's actually almost done too. So let me just rethread my machine real quick. Okay, machine's rethreaded. So now I'm going to go back stitch a little bit, and then I'm going to forward stitch. Back stitch at the end. Okay, so now we're going to do the top and the bottom. So I'm going to do it as if I'm going to have a 3-inch hem at the bottom, even though that's going to make this really small. And then I'm going to do it as if I was following this example up here as well. So on your right side of your fabric, you got to mark again. So the very first mark I need to make is a 1/2 inch from the edge. And this is where I'm going to fold it under, so when my rod goes through, I have a finished edge. Again, you could adjust this to be a little bit smaller if you want, but then you have less of a piece of fabric there to catch when you're sewing it. Okay, there's that one. Then I need to mark 2 3/4 away from that. And I'm going to have to do it smaller right now because I'm going to do 1.5 right now, because otherwise it's going to take up my whole entire piece of fabric since I'm doing small. Okay, so that would be the pocket that the rod's going through. Now I'm going to do another inch at the top instead of 1.5 inches. And this is going to be the ruffle. This all makes sense when it's done, I promise. Okay, and at this point I'm going to stop marking that because these are all the marks I need then to sew on the back. So that's the top. Now the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch. So if you have a directional fabric, like I used the example of Christmas trees the other day, you do want to make sure that you're marking the correct top or bottom the way the design needs to be sitting. Okay, so I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch there. Okay, and I'm not going to be able to do 3 inches, so I'm just going to do 1 inch to show you. Normally if I was doing curtains, I'd do 3 inches, but then again, my top and bottom are going to be over top of each other because this isn't long enough. Okay, so the 1/2 inch, and then whatever you want your hem to be there. So now I'm going to go over to the ironing board again. So the first one that you want to press is the 1/2 inch that you marked along the top. Press that. And now I'm going to press it. The mark that you made there, which would be the 2 3/4, that's going to be my mark where I'm going to be sewing. So I'm not actually going to press it there. I'm going to press it on my top mark because that's where the very top panel for the curtains are. So that's the top of the curtains. Okay, and I'm going to put a couple pins in there and sew across there. And now I'm going to do the same for the bottom. So I fold at the 1/2 inch, and then whatever you want your hem to be, which in this case I had to do 1 inch, which 1 inch for curtains is fine, but like I said, most stores actually have about a 3 inch. So this is a teeny tiny little curtain piece right now. So I'm going to go over and show you where I would put pins in this. Okay, now one of the things that happens, and this happens to me every single time I do this for people, because I made quite a few curtains. It does tend to stretch out a little bit because that's that crosswise grain where there's a little bit of stretch. So what I'm going to do just to make sure that my ends match up, that's the most important. If you end up with a little pucker on the back, it's not going to be a big deal. So I'm going to match up my end and put a pin in. And then over here, if you see this edge is hanging over. So what I'm going to do is just make it match. So move it over a little bit, and now the edge is lined up, and put a pin in here. And it doesn't matter if your balls of your pins are down here, up here, it'll be the same. And then when you're sewing something straight and pretty sturdy, I tell my students, you can just use your hand as a guide. So put a pin and then put your 4 fingers down and then put another pin. So this isn't very wide, so I'm just going to put one in the middle. But if you were pinning across the whole thing, I would just use my hand as a guide and have that much distance between it. So for the top piece, I'm going to do the same thing for the top part. So I'm going to make sure my edges matched up. Put a pin in there. Same thing on the other side. Move it over. Make sure my edges matched up. Because this is what people are going to see is the end. That's why it's important that that matches up. And then you can see I have a little bit of a bump here. That's okay. I'm just going to have a little pucker in the back. No one's going to see the back side of the curtain. Okay, so now when I go over to the sewing machine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew close to the edge here. That'll be our bottom hem. I'm going to sew close to the edge here. That's going to be where the bottom of the rod is touching. And I'm going to do here, and that's going to be where the top rod is touching, top of the rod. So you come over here to the machine again. So I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to use this side of my presser foot to line up with the fold I did. That'll make sure that I go straight, and it'll also be close enough to the edge. Remember, you have a 1/2 inch hidden underneath here that you don't see. So as long as you're on that 1/2 inch, you're good. The other thing is when it comes to the rod, I made the number a little bit bigger so that when you're sewing this part, that is going to subtract from the part of the rod. So now I'm just going to back stitch. And because I'm putting my pins in there to make sure my edges are lined up, I do want to sew right until I'm about to hit a pin and then take the pin out. If you go over the pin again, you can break a needle, which I did do just the other day. When you get to the end, make sure you back stitch. And you definitely want to trim the threads now because you will have some threads in the back. So this is the bottom of our curtain. And again, this is what people are going to see. So if you're still practicing and getting good at sewing, I would definitely recommend using a color of thread that blends in nicely. So if you go a little crooked, nobody will know anyways. I would definitely not make curtains with this color thread and this color fabric because it's very obvious if I didn't sew straight. Okay, so now I'm going to do the bottom pocket, bottom part of where the rod's going to be. So again, I'm going to line my presser foot up with the fold. I'm going to sew backwards a couple stitches. Sew until I'm about to hit the pin. So for it, again, don't worry about if you have teeny tiny puckers back there because your curtains are going to be scrunched up anyways. I'm going to go to the end and back stitch. Okay, I'll trim my threads in a minute. And now the last stitch that I'm going to do is basically where those marks are that I made. So now I'm going to move my needle to the middle position just because it's easier for me to line up when I'm trying to follow marks if it's in the middle. So I'm going to back stitch. Just try and go through my marks as straight as I can. Back stitch at the end. This may be another part that you actually want to pin because if you can see my back side's a little forward, but when the curtain's scrunched up, you're not going to see it as much. You'll definitely be able to see it at the hem that's on the bottom. So I would definitely do that. So I'm just trimming all my threads. So at this point, your curtain is done. So if this was my real curtain, now I'd be able to put it on my rod. So if I pretend this is the rod, I have the rod pocket here. stick this in. It will be scrunched up. On the rod, you have your ruffle at the top, you have your pocket for your rod, and then you have your curtain at the bottom. So again, if you don't like that ruffle that's at the top, you'd basically just, you wouldn't have to do this top stitching here. You could sew a stitch down here, and then the rod could just go through that. The larger rods need about a 3-inch pocket, I believe. So that's my tutorial on basic curtains. Again, if you have any questions and you're not sure how you would need to do the width and the length of your pieces, I would be more than happy to figure out the math for you. And if you have any more questions, let me know. So it was nice seeing you, and I'll see you all on Monday.